Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to the BookEnds Book Club. I'm JP Solheim, the Associate Director of the BookEnds Novel Revision Fellowship, part of the Lichtenstein Center at Stony Brook University. BookEnds was founded in 2017 by co-directors Susan Scarf-Merrill and Meg Wolitzer, with the aim of supporting writers in polishing their novels for readership. Tonight, we're featuring a novel by one of BookEnds' mentors, Eve Gleichman, along with their co-author, Laura Blackett. Eve and Laura are writing partners in Brooklyn who met 10 years ago as neighbors in the same apartment building, and soon after began collaborating on their debut novel, The Very Nice Box, which became a New York Times Editor's Choice and an Apple Book of the Month. Their second co-authored novel, Trust and Safety, just published with Dutton, is the topic of conversation this evening. In conversation with Eve and Laura is program co-founding director Meg Wolitzer, whose novels include The Female Persuasion, The Interestings, The 10-Year Nap, The Position, and The Wife, among others. Wolitzer, who has also written books for young readers, was guest editor of the Best American Short Stories 2017. She is also host of the literary radio show and podcast Selected Shorts. Following the conversation, there will be plenty of time for questions, so don't hesitate to join through the chat feature below, where you will also find a link to order signed copies of Trust and Safety through Greenlight Books, as long as you place your order by tonight. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome, Eve, Laura, and Meg.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to you both on this wonderful book. It's very exciting to be here on the second day after your publication. How does it feel?
Yeah, thank you for
so much
talking to us. It feels good.
Yeah, it feels really good. Our first book came out during the pandemic, and I know we're back on Zoom, but we got to have a nice in-person event last night and see people in real life, and that was really fun. Yeah, so it feels really good.
Yeah.
That's so great. That's so great. Well, I'm so intrigued by how you work together, because, when you mentioned doing an event, I'm like, one of the things when you have a book out is you have to go off there on your own, right? It's just you. And if you go traveling, it's you and your, luggage, and it's just you waiting to see who shows up and all of that. It must make it less lonely, not only to do that, but even the writing process. Can you jump in and talk about how it came about to begin with?
Yeah. First of all, I agree with you that it's less lonely. Something that we hear from other writers a lot is that they could never imagine writing a book with another person, and I feel sort of the opposite way about that. Having done it this way, I can't imagine writing a book alone, and also doing this part of the doing touring around alone. It just seems really, really lonely and sort of yeah, a little scary. So it's nice to have each other. We met over 10 years ago now, having moved into the same apartment building in Brooklyn. Laura lived in an apartment 2 floors up from me with, I want to say, the same footprint, but I actually don't think it had the same footprint.
Yeah, it was a little different. Yeah,
it was nicer.
I wasn't gonna say it.
And we became friends. We became friends in the building. I think Laura has a story of once seeing me for the first time outside of the building doing laundry.
Yeah, we would trade dinners back and forth, and it took a really long time for our friendship to exit the building. And yes, I was really disoriented one day seeing Eve come in from the outside. But yeah, we traded dinners back and forth. We were both in very different places in life. Eve was getting an MFA in fiction. I was working at a tech company, and over dinner we would trade stories, and the workplace where I was became kind of the focal point of our first book and the satire there. And so I don't know, I wish that I could remember the exact moment. I'm sure it was your idea, but I
think that's right. Yeah, it's sort of I agree. I don't remember the exact moment that we decided to embark on a book together, but we had done other projects together. We had cooked together, we had built things together, and it felt like not such a stretch to try something like writing a book together.
Yeah. Sorry.
We're in Brooklyn now, so there's a little bit of outside noise. I hope it's not too.
It's fine. But did you know your sensibility would be either the same or compatible? I mean, there's a line by Zadie Smith in an essay, Fail Better, that I love about the novel. And she says, when I write, I'm trying to express my way of being in the world.
Yeah.
Your two books are satirical, really droll, really very much in touch with the world as we live it right now in this moment. Was that something that you knew about each other in your conversations, that you both were very focused on that?
I think we had a feeling about it. I think that and to your earlier point, like the entire collaboration has really been so much about our friendship and about like sort of bits of gossip and stories we like to text each other. And like we laugh a lot during the course of writing the book. Like, and I think that we had a sense that our senses of humor were really similar, and that we were kind of that we were noticing the same things or similar things about relationships and people in our life and our workplaces and New York City. And I think that we did have a sense of that. And I think that noticing those things and talking about those things just as friends has been like a really main source of inspiration for us. I mean, one of the nicest things I think about collaborating on a book versus writing one alone is that if you imagine like the writing process working solo, you might have a cool idea and you would write it down in a little notebook and it would live there until you decided to look at it again. But between the two of us, that becomes a text message, and then it goes and it lives in somebody else's brain and it does something there and it comes out the other side like a little bit changed and a little bit more interesting. And so I think that we go back and forth like that in a really like playful, fun, humor-filled way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if you saw our emails or texts, you would not be surprised at what then came out of.
I think like one of my favorite ideas that worked its way into our new novel, Trust and Safety, happened after like 6 hours of just hanging out and sitting by a fire and doing our own thing on our computers. And then like out of the silence, one of us just started laughing and had an idea for this like kind of smart home tech feature that would interrupt and butt in and be inappropriate. And I think that like that to me couldn't have happened alone, and it couldn't have happened, I think, if we were working separately. And one of the things actually that has the writing process for this, our second book, has felt a little bit different because so much of it did happen during the pandemic and we couldn't spend as much time together. But then when we could, some really nice things would shake out of it. So yeah, I feel like it's been fun.
Well, let's pull back a little bit so that viewers at home can learn a little bit about what the book is, and maybe you could read from it or give us a little amuse-bouche, the free thing that you get on the table at the restaurant, and maybe set up the reading and just a little bit set up the book for us.
Yeah, the book is about a newlywed straight couple who live in Brooklyn. The husband is a tech lawyer who works for a sort of Alexa-ish company. And his new wife is a canvasser for an LGBTQ rights organization. And she's like out in Union Square with a clipboard, trying to get signatures and money from people. She's miserable. She falls into this Instagram black hole, basically, where she's being served ads and content about life upstate, and she starts sort of thirsting after what a wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver calls this. And so she convinces, after looking at lots and lots of upstate homes online and an ad for like a beautiful vegetable peeler, she convinces her husband to buy a house upstate so that they can live a new kind of life that doesn't include like pigeons, dying in front of them. And they do that. They go upstate, and things do not work out very well for them. And one of the things that happens is that they have to, for financial reasons, rent out part of this fixer-upper that they've bought, which is a disaster. And they rent it out to a very handy and attractive queer couple who are part of this sort of bigger queer polycule that the straight couple gets sort of entangled with. And one detail is just that this house that they've bought, unbeknownst to them, happens to be a like lesbian historic landmark. So it's sort of like the epicenter of all this gay activity in town, and this is this like totally straight couple who own it now. So
Yeah.
that's what the book is about. And I think, do you want to read from the second chapter where?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll read from chapter 2. So the book starts with a wedding between Rosie and Jordan. And chapter 2 takes place 3 months after the wedding. And I think gives you a little bit of a sense of Rosie, our protagonist's state of mind shortly into marriage, and like her kind of like boredom and loneliness and Instagram habit. And yeah, so I'm gonna read from chapter 2. Rosie had hoped marrying Jordan would propel her forcefully into adulthood, giving her life new purpose and clarity. But she was disappointed to realize that her life was largely the same as it had been before the wedding. She was no closer to understanding what she wanted from it. She and Jordan still lived in their same 2-bedroom apartment. They still streamed the reality TV show in which groups of men and women dated without being allowed to see one another. The contestants sat in separate rooms, professing their greatest personal tragedies and sexual kinks through a purple wall, until eventually, after a few weeks, some of the men picked women to propose to, having never seen their faces. The men and women always performed absolute certainty about their decisions. "You're my hell yes," one man said to a woman behind a wall. "You're my hell yes," Jordan said to Rosie, kissing her cheek. Rosie felt buoyed by his certainty. They were both addicted to their phones. Jordan spent hours each week researching stocks and gadgets and playing word games against his colleagues, while Rosie scrolled through Instagram as soon as she woke up, during her morning commute, before bed, and occasionally in the middle of the night. Sometimes she would close Instagram and then immediately reopen it as if possessed. The app intuited that she was married and had started serving her content about homemaking and design. She was highly susceptible to these ads and influencers and had quickly fallen into a pocket of Instagram devoted to rural life in upstate New York, which had led her to make a series of impulsive purchases, including an 80-year-old sourdough starter. Waking at a small hour one night, Rosie found her thoughts encircling a familiar fear. She wondered if she'd actually chosen her life, or if she'd simply taken the path of least resistance. She worried that there was no solid core to her identity, that she was the negative space of all the things she'd never done, the risks she'd never taken, the questions she'd never asked. This fear is part of why she'd accepted Jordan's proposal after only 9 months. She was desperate to say yes to something and let it take her somewhere new. While she and Jordan lay in bed, she opened Instagram, dreading work the next day. She started scrolling through posts from upstate home builders and farmers. The algorithm led her to an account run by a farmer who posted the daily joys and struggles of raising sheep in the Catskill Mountains. Gigantic, fluffy, stoic dogs fended off coyotes. Twin lambs were born daily. Some struggled to gain weight, but they were cared for tirelessly by their mothers. Life on the farm was dictated by biological necessity and natural beauty, according to the captions. The mountains were strewn with fog. This was when she saw it, a photograph of a cast iron vegetable peeler. Its matte black body was curved like a wishbone, the ends joined at the top by a sharp handmade blade. Entranced, she swiped through a carousel of images. The peeler in the palm of a strong, hardworking hand, each vein visible. The peeler creating a delicate ribbon from a carrot whose roots were still attached. The peeler resting on a butcher block beside a wooden salad bowl while many beautiful people gestured toward the food. And finally, the image that made her realize she was looking at an advertisement. The peeler hanging from a shaker peg rail, its curves fully articulated like a ballerina's point shoe. It was a barn dinner, the doors open wide to the mountains. A group of friends ate vegetables they'd raised from seed and harvested that day. They were a tightly knit, chosen family. They were happy, purposeful, and satisfied. It was a Japanese company, and Rosie wasn't sure how much the peeler cost in US dollars, but she didn't care. She would pay anything.
Right. You know, the writing is so above and beyond what I might imagine just sort of for satire in some way, which isn't to say it doesn't always have to be good, but it really is like the writing. I was just, again, remarking on the beauty of it here and how you kind of join beauty and humor in a way that I rarely see. And is that something on a language level that you were aware of, or is it just naturally how you write, but you were going to be writing satire?
That's so nice. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
I'm just taking in the compliment of it all.
I'll let Laura do that. It's funny because I never, while we were writing, I know it's a satirical novel, but I never felt that way about it.
That it was a satire.
Yeah, I
Really,
know.
do you think I'm wrong calling it satire?
No, I think you're right. I think it is a satire. But I don't think I think this was true with the first book too, that we didn't approach it as satire.
I think that we were really surprised the first time around when we first shared it with people that they told us that they laughed while they were reading it. We didn't know that it was funny. And I think that one I think pretty good comment that we got was that like we were just sort of describing something as it is, something kind of ridiculous as it is, and it does seem like satire and a little bit out of this world, but it is, especially the sort of Instagram ads and the devices that listen and these small communities that seem like they're the whole world, like are in the first book, our workplace, and in the second book, this queer polycule that ends up taking up a lot of it. So yeah, I don't know. I think it is satire, but we weren't exactly shooting for that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
This is interesting to think about because maybe this gets to the heart of how writers write, which is that if you aim the arrow directly for the target, you're writing, I don't know, polemic or something. You're not really allowing the freedom that a good book of any kind really needs. So when I say satire, I guess what I mean is that, there's so much in both books about the erotics of things. Like the books share that, this notion of desire, the way the way objects for sale in a catalog are described with names that will make people excited about them, and here the beauty of, the wishbone, that line about the wishbone, the curves, it's about the seductions that we've all given our lives over to. And I guess my instinct is to call that satire. On the other hand, before this started, we had a moment in our fake green room in our separate homes where I said I thought the book was very funny, and you said that's nice to hear because people said they were really depressed by it. To me, those are kind of almost indistinguishable from each other. I don't think that those responses are necessarily all that different. We're laughing, on the lip of the volcano of the abyss that we're all in, as sort of everything is monetized, everything is up for grabs, everything's for sale. Or as somebody said about the internet, everybody's selling and nobody's buying. But that isn't true here. There's a lot of things for sale. Maybe finding ways to write about what is so obvious and what is around us and what we're thinking about and what we're marinating in. If you let yourself do that, the tone finds itself. Is that correct?
Maybe. I think I have a few things are crossing my mind. One is that I think one thing that we have done in both of these novels that contributes to the satire and to the humor is to take what's around us and then abstract it by like 1 degree. So to describe in this book, we're describing an Alexa device basically, and we're describing in this passage that I just read a reality show that does exist. And I think that helps us. But in thinking about sort of buying things, I think that another thing that I think both of our books have in common is that they follow protagonists who I think really believe that they can buy something online that changes their personality and like changes their temperament and leads to self-actualization. And they're trying to do that through things and through their phones. And not so much through other people.
Yeah, I guess I never want it to feel like we're completely skewering every character. Well, we are skewering the characters, but we are inside all of these characters. I really see myself in all of these characters. I don't know about you, but like
I do.
You know, I certainly have bought things on Instagram thinking that they would completely change my like that a pair of boxer briefs would totally alter the course of my life.
Thing to buy that will change anybody's life is your book. So
yeah, that is nice. So that's just to say that maybe along with the skewering is a lot of tenderness, I think, or I hope, that we see ourselves in all of these characters and feel it's I hope that it doesn't feel like a mean book.
No, the opposite of that. And that's why I actually mentioned the thing about language and the beauty of this book. I was flagging some lines both for beauty and humor, which again, isn't that what Keats said? Beauty is humor, humor beauty. Immediately after sending the text, she regretted not workshopping it more. I mean, I love that line so much because the notion of workshopping a text is great. And then here's a beauty line. Vapor lingered in the necks of beers. Vapor lingered in the necks. I mean, that just feels to me like you didn't really think about that so much, but it's a kind of perspective. It's just not wasting a line, not putting in those lines that are nobody's favorite parts, But as to the humor of Family Friend, this device that listens in and makes recommendations about what it thinks you need. I mean, this was so funny and out of control. I'll just read this little bit. The Family Friend dinged twice. Hey, fam, it said, seems like we're running out of some stuff. Want me to pick up 10 milligram, 350 count, fast acting, fast and reliable allergy medication, allergy relief 4-pack, an Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, paperback, 25-foot pro-feel lasso, genuine Honda knot cowboy and cowgirl beige. Dylan's eyes widened. Rosie remembered her impression of Jordan shaking a cocktail and Dylan's laughter. You look like you're about to throw a lasso, she'd said. She turned to Rosie. I shut off that thing. How did it hear us? It's because they hate me, Jordan said. That's not true, Rosie said. They think I'm corporate and materialistic. Now in a way, hearing this, I thought we're all in this. We're all in this together in some strange way. We're part of this polycule, this many part polycule. So I definitely felt that tenderness while reading this. And I think it distinguishes the book among other.
I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you.
That was something that was important to us.
Yeah, one thing that I definitely felt while writing the book was like I spent the first half of writing all of my desires and frustrations into the characters, and then the second half sort of turning on them a little bit and being critical of the things that they are reaching for and the reasons why. And that was so it was a roller coaster,
Yeah, I think we went into the book really wanting to punish the husband, Jordan, and emasculate him and humiliate him and just make him feel like a real fool, and introduce these like really attractive women into the book who would seduce his wife. And that was just so funny, and we felt so good about ourselves, and we're patting ourselves on the back about that idea and coming up with just like mountains of examples of how we could humiliate this character.
I mean, we thought that the joke would be that he would be just like the way that he is looking at the group of queer people that enter the book.
Right.
And I think sorry, I interrupted. But.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's how it started, and then that became less interesting as we were writing.
Well, and we sort of realized through writing it that there's plenty to make fun of in the queer group as well. So it was like, what if we have him ask a bunch of questions that might make you cringe? And then I think that through looking through his eyes a little bit, there was plenty to poke fun at all around. And so I think that everybody ends up being the butt of the joke at one point or another in the book. And I think everybody every character who you love or feel frustrated by is punished in some way in the end.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that true in life?
Yes.
You know? But even Jordan's mother, Bridie, who's sort of hilarious character, you have this line, his mother, who wore a navy pantsuit and a string of pearls as though she were auditioning to play the part of herself. It's just, I mean, it's not mean humor. It's humor that comes out of who these people are and the observations that you're making. Can you talk a little bit about humor in fiction, and does it arise? And you said you didn't know it was funny when you were writing. Um, when you read it back or read to each other, did you then start to get an inkling of that?
I think maybe more so with this book than with the first one. I think that everything is funny, or everything has the potential to be funny. And if there's not humor to be found in a novel, I feel suspicious a little bit of it. You're like, there's, even in my own personal life during the darkest periods, for instance, like, I lost my dad in an accident, and we had to, it's during a family vacation, and we had to come, we flew back to the States, and we had to put his ashes through a conveyor belt, like TSA style, like on this conveyor belt. And there was something, I mean, that was like the worst period of my life. And yet that was so ridiculous, that was so absurd. And like, looking back, there's something funny about that. Some other people would disagree, I think, with that characterization. But I think that everything has the potential to be a little bit ridiculous or absurd. Maybe funny isn't the right word there, but just ridiculous. And so I think maybe that's what's happening. That certainly happens in the first book, and I think it happens here too, that even in these moments of dread and anxiety, and the main character of this book is constantly feeling like she's made the wrong decision. She's just consumed by uncertainty, and it's a terrible feeling. And I think we managed to make that indecision satirical.
Yeah, I think once we started to get to know the characters, it felt easier to sort of dial up and down their behaviors. Like, I think that there's always, like, for me at least, a tipping point halfway through where the characters really start to feel like themselves. And then I think the choice is ours about whether to make them like caricatures of themselves, or just kind of what level to get at. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that even in life, I like to break a tense moment with a joke. I think that that's just sort of how I am and how we are, I think, as friends.
I think that's true.
Maybe
Yeah.
part of our collaborative process. I mean, even in sort of the earlier days of working together, like, our dinners we would be venting, like things weren't always going great in life, but we would be laughing about it. And so I think that part came.
It's impossible. I mean, we started this book thinking it would be a suspense novel, and it's really funny to think that we ever had that feeling.
Mhm.
It's really far from that. I just think we can't really manage to stay away from the satire.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but it's probably humor as some kind of defense mechanism for.
It's also, in a way, the fiction of anxiety too. I
Mhm.
mean, books about like modern life sort of consuming us as we are consumers. I mean, a book like White Noise, I think about, Don DeLillo, and other books that have just sort of looked at what we've done with ourselves, and how what we're in your books, what we're giving ourselves over to. So right away, it's, to me, not just about like a satire of consumerism. It's really anxiety, almost like part self-awareness. Like, you get characters flicker with self-awareness, and then are taken up by something bigger than them and more absurd. And I think that may actually mirror how we often go through life. Like, you start to have a kind of a thought that could help you escape from this moment, and then you're sucked back in to something you see online. And I think that was very that seemed accurate to what it's like not necessarily living upstate in a polycule, although the idea of buying a fixer-upper is my worst nightmare. Like I feel like, to me, I've never in my life had one moment of desire for that. Like I know that it would be our ruination. It would be our absolute ruination. Doris Lessing wrote a book, and I'm trying to remember if I'm not sure this is exactly right, but apparently her parents bought a farm, like just like radically moved to Zimbabwe, which was called Rhodesia at the time. And she wrote a book, and the first part is about this couple doing that and kind of having this successful experience. And that was the fiction part. And the second part was very much based on what actually happened, which is that it was like their ruination, because the farm went to seed. They couldn't make a go of it. It was absolutely terrible, and it was their really hard, terrible life. So to me, like reading about people doing something that's so frightening to me and that could lead to disaster is very weirdly seductive in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, Rosie, who convinces Jordan to buy this house, has been looking at what's it called when like a video, like fast motion, what is that called?
Stop motion?
Well, when a video goes like
like that speeded up of a flower film, those like
right. She's been watching videos of beat up houses getting fixed.
Great, yeah.
People like snapping their finger.
And then it's like
here's
our rusty bathtub, and like we snap our fingers and now it's beautiful. And so I do think she has this feeling that like, oh, I saw this, no problem. This is a DIY project, and she has no idea what she's getting into.
Yeah. That part was cathartic for me to write. I had an experience with a fixer-upper that was really hard and time lapse. Yeah. And anyway, the way I was sort of talking about it in my life and representing it online, it was like, as if I was living the dream or something, but really, one morning I woke up and I saw something a little bit unusual in the corner of the house, and I got closer to it and I realized that a mouse had taken a brick of ramen noodles and tried to drag it under a hole in the baseboard. And like, that was just one of the mornings that I woke up. Like, I won't tell you what happened the other mornings that I woke up. And so getting to put this all down on the page was pretty cathartic for me. And one of the things that Eve and I sent back and forth between each other while we were writing is this New York Times piece that I think it had a title like they fled for greener pastures and then there were weeds, and it was about people who had relocated from New York City to upstate New York during the pandemic, and then realized like that it's hard to tend to land, and it's hard to live away from people, and it's hard to raise kids away from people. And that this sort of there are Facebook groups that have popped up with communities of people who are like, wait, it's really hard to live out here. And sort of this like this exodus from the city and then kind of a return to it, and it was a good piece.
I certainly had this fantasy. I was upstate during the beginning of the pandemic and going on, it was like for the first time I wasn't going into the office every day. I was working from a beautiful house and I was going on hikes, and I was like, this is it. What I can't believe I haven't been doing, I've been wasting my life and I could have been doing this, and had a total rosy fantasy of relocating. And so I feel for her, or I see what she sees. And I also know that it's not so easy.
Well, that brings me to wondering about, the book really addresses how should a person live? What's a good way to live? And, whether it comes to sort of, being just in a couple, monogamy, can you talk about that and how queerness comes into play in this book?
Yeah, I think this question about how a person should live was on our minds. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about, I think really since writing the book and getting to reflect a little bit, is just that Rosie is such a consumer. Like, the only way that she knows how to move her life forward is to buy something. What's on her mind is what's on her phone. And really at every turn, the only way that she moves herself along is by buying something. And she is really the content that she's consuming and the things that she ends up being really attracted to once she gets to upstate New York is that she's surrounded by these queer people who are like makers, and they're doing things with their hands, but they're also like kind of building themselves up from scratch and kind of creating their identities and their family structures and all of these things. I think that they're also building those things and making those things. And yeah, so one question in the book is maybe about consuming things versus making things. And I think that is part of why she's so attracted and so fascinated with this group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's important to be able to make a choice and sort of not be paralyzed by all the other ways that your life could have gone, which is where Rosie gets really caught up. She can't help but wonder what would have happened if she, she has this memory, for instance, of this like erotic encounter she'd once had with a girl in college, and she puts, it was like they shared a bed together one night or something. Like it wasn't that big from an outside perspective. It's like, what happened there? There wasn't much to it, but she's put so much stock into this moment, and tied herself into knots, reimagining a life in which she sort of followed this girl somewhere and had a different kind of life. And I think that's her curse throughout the book, is imagining her life different from the one that she actually has. So she doesn't ever, I don't think she ever really gets to experience her life. And so I would say the kind of life we want to live is one opposite from that experience.
Yeah.
Well,
I think,
sorry, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is I'm a little bit of a change of the topic, kind of, but it's about queerness and and also I guess about satire. But I think that we both thought it would be really funny to take a straight couple and kind of put them in queer land. And I think it was during revision that we decided that we would make everybody that they encountered in the Hudson Valley gay or queer. And we thought that was funny, but I think we were also, I think that some like real questions about like belonging and who's kind of on the inside and who's on the outside kind of shook out of that decision, that I think it was a decision that I think we made to be funny, and then some bigger questions shook out. And it's reminding me that as part of the writing process, we sent around a survey it was to queer women who were in relationships with cis men. And we asked them a bunch of questions about how they thought of their identity and their relationship. And one of the things that we asked was how they feel in queer spaces. And there was kind of like a common thread or a theme that we noticed, where the women that responded to the survey sort of felt isolated within queer spaces. They felt like they weren't queer enough, or they didn't belong, or that they were taking up space and they shouldn't, but that they also felt a little bit lonely sometimes in their relationships too. And so they ended up being kind of extra lonely, or between something, or like, I think that we wrote that experience into Rosie as well. She doesn't feel like she fits in with this group of people that she encounters in the Hudson Valley. And she also doesn't really feel like Jordan, her husband, sees her fully. And so, yeah, that was something that we were thinking about.
With Jordan, I was looking at this line because I understand the impulse to, and that you do, in fact, there's a lot of, jokes at his expense. On the other hand, sometimes he sees things the way that the reader is really seeing them too. Like there's this bit where he asks, I guess his mother asks, "What is it you all do for work?" And then he says, "Lark makes sweaters and Dylan makes chairs. And in their free time, which appears to be unlimited," Jordan continued, "they dance with woodland creatures and make mead from the nectar of unicorn horns." And that's sort of what the reader is thinking too, as they're kind of jealous of these people for living this life that, at least for a while, looks effortless. So you kind of have an interesting way of bringing us in and out of these spaces and these identities, like who is the reader, like where did the reader's affection lie? And it changes a little bit throughout the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I agreed with Jordan in that passage. Like,
No, me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm like, yeah, what do you guys do for work? Get a job. You know,
Yeah.
like the sort of like Republican in me comes out sometimes in his character. I'm not a Republican.
I was gonna say, I don't think I have a Republican in me.
No, but there's like a little cop inside, you know, and it's like, yeah, what is it that how do you make your money? How do you pay for insurance? I gotta know. And that's his vibe, you know, and actually Rosie wants to know the answers to these questions too, but she won't admit it. And so he's voicing these things that, you know, he's asking the questions that she has, but then she's embarrassed that he would dare ask the question, even though
she like shushes him.
She like tries to quiet him, even though she's desperate to know the answers to the questions.
Yeah, it was sort of like a psychological thriller writing the book and getting to choose like which character to where to put the different parts of me. You know, like am I the person who is really critical of this group and wants to know how they're making any money and getting by, or am I the person who is really attracted to the way that they're living and sort of would like more of that for myself? And writing the book was hard for that reason. I think that depending on how real I wanted to be with myself or whatever, I think that like my loyalties shifted a lot in writing the book. And that's something that we have heard really pretty consistently from readers so far, is that like just sort of like that who they're with and who they're against is shifting constantly. We did an interview with someone who, as far as I can tell, is like a middle-aged cis man. And he was talking about how much at times he could identify with this polycule because he went through a divorce and there were there were remarriages, there were kids from both sides. And he was like, and I needed a spreadsheet to tell people what was going on. And that is a joke that I've heard poly people make about their kind of complicated, like romantic lives and schemes. And I loved that. I loved during that interview that he could see some of himself in the characters in the book that I think on their face, I would say that he would be farthest from. And I loved that. And I think that that's one thing that I hope will continue to happen for other readers.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think so. Oh, here's Jen.
I hate to interrupt this conversation. It's fascinating. But we do want to open up the floor to some questions from the audience. And we have, if you don't mind taking it, a first question from Fearless co-director Susie, who is asking, I'm curious as to whether you remain aware of which lines originated with each of you, or does your process amalgamate the writing down to the sentence?
Sometimes. I think the answer is sometimes for me. Like there's definitely lines in the book that I feel proud of and that I can remember. Like I remember like laboring over it, and so I remember it. But then weird things happen where it's like for the vast majority of the book, even in trying to remember who wrote it, will be like, well, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's like, I gave him a hat, but you put the hat backwards.
Yeah.
And we had him sitting, but then, you know, it goes back and forth like that. And it can be really hard to remember.
I have no idea. I mean, even I'm just thinking.
Surely there are lines that you feel proud of.
Well, it's like, what do the line that you read, Meg, about the vapor lingering in the neck of the bottle? Oh, I was like, that.
No, that was you.
Line.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know.
I know it wasn't me because I think it's so good and I would remember it and feel proud of it. So it had to be you.
I don't, you know, we both read the book 1 zillion times and we edit it so much that it's all, I feel like we both wrote every word of the book. So it's hard. It's really hard for me to remember. There's some scenes that I can think, oh, I remember coming up with the idea for this scene maybe, but when it comes to the actual lines, it's really hard for me to remember.
Yeah. I think, you know, Eve is also, I think that we have kind of like complementary strengths. I think that Eve is a little bit more of an editor than I am at the line level. And I'm pretty good with like plot and character and moving things around. And so I think that like Eve, in the end, you do a lot of buffing and tightening, and you are like really involved at the sentence level until like the very last second. And I think that I let go a little, like a minute sooner. So
yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
I mean, and I'm just kind of pulling from something you said earlier. Obviously, this is a collaborative process because you're co-writing, but it sounds like it's even more broadly collaborative in terms of you bringing in like surveys of, of other folks. So could you talk a little bit about that, about how that comes into, I don't know, the story or the development of the characters or
I think it's really about collaboration. Yeah, I think every book is a collaboration, even if there's ostensibly one writer, if there's one name on the book, you're still collaborating with your editor and you still have readers and you, I don't know, you show the book to your partner and there's a copy editor involved. There's so many hands, are touching every book. That I would say they're all kind of collaborations. And this was just one way, it's like, why we sold the book on a partial manuscript. And so our editor had a huge hand in, what actually happened in the book. And then I like kind of widening the circle as much as, like the more people, well, there's probably a limit, but I see those people who contributed to that survey that we put out as part of this collaboration.
Yeah, I'm having a funny thought about I think that we do pull a lot of inspiration, draw a lot of inspiration from real life. And I'm having a funny thought about people in our lives being kind of unwitting or maybe unwilling collaborators with us just by
being in
our lives. So, yeah.
I have two things I want to ask, unless are there some other things that I don't want to block out anybody, Jen.
No, by all means, go ahead.
Two things. One, I was very much reminded of the Stepford Wives a little bit when reading this. And I wondered if, when you said that you thought of it, you'd conceived of it as a thriller. Ira Levin and those books like Rosemary's Baby and Stepford Wives, I loved when I was young. And, they're the paranoid thriller when you realize, I just thought, wow, that's kind of amazing if upstate New York was this Stepford Wives queer world. Is that the kind of what you meant when you said thriller like that?
That wasn't, I think, in the original, here's a little factoid about the worst word ever about the book is that Jordan's name is Jordan because initially both Jordan and Dylan would be named Jordan. And we sort of thought of this as a suspenseful, heisty novel in which Dylan, who would have been called Jordan in the first draft, sort of took over the house, did some kind of deed heist where she took over his identity and stole the house from under him. And so I think so they were both called Jordan because it was a unisex name that would have made that work. So that was the and we thought of there's gonna be a baby, somebody's gonna steal the baby. It was all about theft and
there was a lot of theft in the beginning. Yeah.
So I think that there was going to be, that was the idea, but and that he would, this is part of the original idea that we were just going to, bully Jordan forever, it was and they're going to steal his house and they're going to steal his baby and they're going to, do all this. So once we let go of that, I think that sort of heisty quality to the book.
Rosemary's Baby. Yes. My second unrelated question is, do you have advice? And I actually would be the beneficiary of this advice because I'm actually writing a middle grade book with my son and we're writing it together. And do you have advice for people writing a book together? What works?
Yes, and you'll hear the ice cream truck outside chiming in too.
Unless it's the knife sharpener truck, you never really know.
That would be that would be more useful.
Go out there and it's knives.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to hear I have some ideas, but I'm curious to hear and I would be curious also, Meg, to hear your answer to this question. But
I think that I think some of my advice would be advice that I would give anybody trying to write a novel, but not to don't be so precious or too attached to your first drafts. I think that writing this book, like we every scene changed, every sentence changed like 3 times over. And I think that being open and like just trying to move forward in as loosely as you can, I think has really helped us in our, like, if you get too attached to the direction that you think you're going in, I think that it can be hard to like move forward and to accept edits and things like that. So I think trying to be like open and associative and loose is what I would say. I feel like I had something else, but
I think that's what I would say too. It's like all about flexibility, and you have to be willing. I mean, we tore down chapters, our own chapters. You have to have like as little ego as possible going into it, I think.
also, like, I mean, for me, I think on a more logistical level, the way that we move things forward is that we alternate chapters, and in the end, that doesn't, the breakdown doesn't remain because we revised everything together. But that is how we move forward. And I think that one thing that was helpful for me, at least, it was to just like try to let go and forget about the project for like the week where it was Eve's turn to write. And I think that like working in a sort of mental break like that has been really helpful, and getting to like sort of pick things back up, rested, and yeah, just having looked at something else for a few days.
Advice that I could probably take, because I was like in the document as Laura was writing. So that I should think about doing that if we ever do this again. But
Did you have like a mandate, like, okay, this is roughly gonna happen in this chapter? Like, did you knew exactly what she was doing?
We knew plot wise, like we need to get the characters from point A to point B. Like these 3 things need to happen in the chapter, but then all the other stuff, like the actual specific dialogue, the things that they do with their hands, the places where they go, like all of the details, were more or less a surprise to each of us, like as we handed our chapters over. So we would know, for example, I'm trying to think of an example that isn't a spoiler, but maybe if I think about the first chapter, it's like which starts with a wedding. We need to hear from Jordan's mother, Bridie. We need to have the first little ping of the family friend. We need to hear a little bit about Rosie's like state of mind. Like those are the 3 things that need to happen. Everything else kind of becomes a detail. And then we get to sort of character details, like their favorite dessert is Oreos, and then we can bring that throughout the book. So I think, yeah, I feel like I'm kind of rambling now, but that is kind of how it goes. And there is toward the end of revising the book, I had this kind of chart on my wall, and we looked at all of the different sort of subplots and threads that we had going throughout the book, and we kind of talked about where things needed to be dialed up or down, and we sort of divided and conquered and did little surgeries to sort of bump things up or what, and sort of, figure out the texture of it.
Is a little bit like improv with yes and.
Exactly. I think we basically don't ever say no to an idea. Even if we eventually get rid of the thing, we'll at least try it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So yeah, and I think that's really important. I think things would break down quickly if we started saying no.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, unusual. I'm really glad to hear that. That sounds great.
What about you, Meg? How is your partnership going?
Oh, great. I mean, it's really it's interesting because it's, writing for kids, so it's got a different kind of feel about it, but it's, my son is a lot closer, of course, to childhood than I am. So there are things that he reminds me of that he liked when he was young, or what kind of books should have in it. And also the book has to do with making music and sound, which is his field. So I'm kind of, learning a lot about that. But with all my experience writing over the decades, there's a certain kind of shapeliness that I feel I've had more experience in. So maybe that's where I'll put my energy. But as you say, I don't want to be in a no experience either. I don't think either of us wants to. I think this is really true for all writing. You're really getting to something important, which is being open. And I've always, I've taught for a long time, and I think that people who inhibit themselves, whether it's in the service of an idea, well, that's not going to work because I have this idea and I know that I have to get to that point. So if I take them off on this tangent, how can I get to that house down the road? But if you don't take them off on this tangent, if you don't let yourself be free to do that, then you're just writing a tract, right? You're building a path. It's straight, and I could read a very straight path in the news, and I don't necessarily want that. So I think that it's about freedom. It's about the power of not knowing exactly what you're doing. And when you say satire, it's because we're all marinating in this crazy world that, it completely changed overnight with sort of, the internet. It changed us in a very deep way. I remember, when I started writing on a, old electric typewriter using whiteout. It was a very, very different experience. And I remember in one of my novels, that had something of the internet, I had a conversation with my editor in which we talked about how people go to fiction to escape online, but that isn't true anymore. It's about, because it's all one. So you're writing about observations about something that, not that you wish didn't happen, or, or you rebel against, we're in it. So you're writing from within the room. And I think that to be open to what you see and where you want to go, but also to say, I don't even know where I want to go, but I didn't know I wanted this. But that kind of freedom that you're describing you have with each other is exactly what people should have with themselves when they write. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that made any sense, but it is sort of how I feel about writing. So you're kind of just like one brain in a funny way, right?
Yeah, I think it's easier to have that freedom when there's two people, because you have to say, it's so easy to say no to yourself. I think much easier to say no to yourself, and to like have a plan and try to really stick to it, and
and to just like distribute the burden of choice a little bit. Like, I think that one thing that actually ended up in the second novel, there are very few flashbacks, but there were more when we were drafting. And I think that has been a way for us to be a little bit free and to like get to know the characters in a way, is to sort of write these vignettes where we go back in time and learn something about them from an earlier time. And it doesn't always make it to the finished product, but I do think it's like a big part of, or it has been a really helpful part of the writing process, especially like just on the character level.
What you do, what I realize here, and I think we absolutely have to stop in about 1 second here, but what you're doing, you're sort of making manifest the conversation that a writer has with themselves anyway. You're just like the living manifestation of that, but that's what we all do anyway. We're talking to ourselves and saying, do I like this? No, I don't. And you're able to do that and give the burden to each other. And that must be a great relief and a great pleasure, because it
is. Thanks for saying that. That's I think true. And the nice thing about, I think it's really easy to have an idea and then to say to yourself, that's what a stupid idea. I'm never gonna, no, we're not doing that. That's a crazy, and that just doesn't really happen here, because you're nicer to your friends than you are to yourself.
And I think you're more entertained. I'm more entertained by your ideas than my own. And so like, as soon as you have an idea, or as soon as I have an idea, I'm a little bit bored of it because it just has been in my head. And then, but your ideas become my like content, so it's just fun.
Well, what a great solution to some of those writing problems. The book's fantastic. I'm so glad to talk to you tonight. This is really a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Read the book, buy the book. It's terrific. So congrats.
Thank you so much, Meg. Really appreciate you talking to us.
Pleasure. So, Jen, are you saying good night, or am I saying good night?
I think we could both say goodnight. We'll be back in September, and you'll be in conversation with Jocelyn Takex on September 11th. This was wonderful. Thank you, Eve and Laura.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, everybody. Enjoy the book and enjoy the rest of your book tour, and we'll be seeing you out there.
Okay, thanks.
Good night.
Night.